The air in the station was stale, a cold metallic taste on the back of my tongue that reminded me of rusted metal and old water pipes. Even before I stepped out, a strange heaviness had settled over me, one that not even the thrill of the walk could shake. Floating in my suit, I felt trapped between the claustrophobic safety of the station walls and the indifferent emptiness of the outside. But this was part of the job, I told myself. I was trained, after all, for the harsh vacuum and its silent isolation. Commander Alex Grant, I muttered to myself as I prepared to step outside. My own voice was flat, small within the helmet, yet it helped to remember who I was. I wasn't just another speck floating out there. I was the commander. They trusted me. And they're counting on you to do your job. The latch hissed and the airlock door slid open with a muted thud. And there it was. The deep yawning darkness of space stretched out before me. An endless black canvas with distant cold stars scattered like flecks of dust. The station's silver skin gleamed faintly in the dim light, and for a moment it felt like I was staring into an abyss that could swallow me whole. But this was routine, I reminded myself, just another spacewalk. I had been here before. The tether unspooled behind me as I drifted forward, tools at my side, each step rehearsed, the procedure ingrained through hours of training. But as I moved further away from the station, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. A prickle at the back of my neck, an inexplicable sense that I was not alone. I glanced around, scanning the familiar, desolate landscape of nothingness. But there was no one. No one but me and the scattered stars and the hum of distant static from the comms. I brushed the feeling off, or tried to. Maybe it was just the stress, or the silence. A silence that wasn't just an absence of sound, but something more. A total vacuum that seemed to stretch beyond my senses. I could feel my breath inside the suit, quick and shallow, and my heartbeat like a drum in my ears. The station was quiet, too quiet. I hadn't heard from the crew in minutes. A part of me wanted to reach out, to hear Lila's voice, or maybe one of the new cadets who were still nervous about the job. "Command, this is Grant. All systems look good on my end. Can you confirm?" Static crackled in response, thick and hissing, then fell silent again. Nothing. My heart started to beat faster, echoing through my suit. It's just a glitch, I told myself. Just some signal interference. But that didn't explain the weight pressing on my chest, the slow dread that had started to seep into my thoughts. Turning back to the station, I caught something odd, a flicker on the metal surface just a few feet away. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, some sort of optical reflection from my visor. But the flicker grew into something else, a dark, moving smudge against the gleaming metal, shifting in a way that didn't match the station's steady, rigid contours. I blinked, trying to clear my vision. But it was still there, a stain like oil floating on water that pulsed and changed shape, an unnatural black that seemed to absorb the light around it. It wasn't part of the station. My instincts screamed at me, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. I stared at the smudge, my mind racing through every possibility. A fuel leak, some anomaly on the hull. But no leak would look like this. The thing clung to the station like some parasite, its edges shifting in a sickening rhythmic motion. It was as though it was alive, pulsing with a dark, slow energy, and I felt myself transfixed, unable to look away. I reached out, trying to bring the comms to life again. "Command, this is Commander Grant. I'm seeing something unusual. Can you read me? Static. Just more static. The station hung in silence, its familiar silhouette suddenly alien, a hollow shell drifting through space. There was a chill now, seeping through me in waves, an instinctual fear that I could feel in my bones. I pulled myself together, moving my hand to the tether, and ready to pull myself back toward the airlock, back to safety. But as I moved, the thing on the hull seemed to respond. I froze, watching as the dark mass shifted, stretching slowly, as if reaching out to meet me. I felt its awareness. Somehow I knew it was aware, and that was when I felt it, a faint vibration. It pulsed through the metal, running through the station and straight into my suit, a slow, rhythmic beat, not unlike a heartbeat. It was faint, barely there, but unmistakable. My hand trembled on the tether. I couldn't move. Then, in the corner of my visor, I saw something moving. One of the dark tendrils, stretching further, with a deliberate slowness that sent a fresh wave of terror down my spine. The thing was creeping toward me as though testing, learning, understanding me with each shift and pulse. I wanted to scream, to break the silence with anything that would shatter the feeling of helplessness clawing at me. But in the vacuum, my screams would die, unheard. And as I stared at that formless mass, the terrifying reality sunk in. This wasn't just a shadow, a trick of the light. It was a living entity, something not of this world, something ancient and patient, lurking in the quiet call of the void. I couldn't tear my eyes away. The thing on the station's surface was changing, almost unfolding. Its blackness was so complete it seemed to devour the light around it, casting shadows that bent and twisted in ways that defied sense. The longer I stared, the harder it became to convince myself that this was just a trick of the light or a smudge on the hull. It was alive, undeniably and horrifyingly alive. I reached up, trying again to activate my comms, fingers clumsy as I struggled to contain the terror clawing up my throat. "Command, Lila, but can anyone hear me? There's something here. It's moving and I can't." More static, an awful hissing that made my skin crawl. I pressed down harder on the controls, but my voice was lost in the static, swallowed by the distance between us. I was alone. The thing started to move with a slow, deliberate rhythm. As I watched, transfixed and frozen, a piece of it stretched forward, dark and oily, splitting into thin, searching tendrils. They probed and quivered, reaching toward me with an unsettling intelligence. Each time one of those tendrils touched the hull, a vibration pulsed through the metal, echoing through my suit, a low and relentless rhythm that wormed its way into my bones. "It's learning," a voice whispered in my mind, and I realized with a sickening clarity that it was true. This wasn't a mindless anomaly or some mechanical malfunction. It was something conscious, something studying me. Each of its movements was calculated, unhurried, as though it was sizing me up. The rational part of my mind fought back, screaming at me to pull back to the station, to find shelter inside the airlock. I had just started to move when the creature shifted again. The tendrils pulled back, coiling around themselves like a predator retracting its claws. It retreated a few inches, watching, if it could watch. I felt its awareness. It knew I was here. It understood that I was moving, and it seemed to be waiting. A horrible thought crept into my mind. It wants me to react. Fear overtook reason. I pushed away from the creature, yanking hard on the tether to pull myself toward the station's airlock. But as soon as I moved, so did it. The entity expanded, its dark mass spreading out across the metal hull in smooth, fluid motions that sent fresh waves of terror through me. It was moving faster now, following me, adapting to my pace, anticipating my every motion. My breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. I gritted my teeth, willing myself to stay calm, to keep moving. But the closer I got to the airlock, the more it seemed to close in, reaching out with those tendrils again, stretching toward me with a terrifying, knowing patience. Its tendrils brushed against the edge of my suit, feather-light, a caress so cold it felt like death itself. Forcing myself not to scream, I kicked harder, pressing down on my training, trying to keep my movements as steady as possible. If I just kept calm, maybe I could outmaneuver it, reach the station and shut the airlock doors before it could follow. But deep down, I knew it was hopeless. This thing was faster, smarter, and I was caught in its game, a pawn in some terrifying experiment I couldn't understand. The airlock hatch loomed just ahead, and for a fleeting second relief washed over me. I was so close. Just a few more feet. Then the entity's shape began to shift again. It pulled back slightly, as if retracting, only to surge forward in a way that made my stomach twist. It was almost like a pulse, a dark heartbeat that seemed to echo through my helmet, into my very bones. The noise throbbed in my ears, drowning out even my own thoughts. Each pulse seemed to drain something from me, leaving me cold and empty. In my panicked, foggy mind, I heard a voice, my own, only a whisper now, fading fast. "You won't make it. You're already gone." I stopped just outside the airlock, turning to face the thing as it loomed before me, and in that frozen moment, the creature began to shift once more. The black mass flattened, spreading out into something more humanoid, vaguely mimicking my own outline. There, within its surface, I saw something that nearly shattered me. My reflection. It was distorted, twisted, an uncanny double. I stared into its face, my face, reflected in a way that was almost familiar, but not quite. My features rippled across its dark surface, hollowed out, dead-eyed, as though it were absorbing me, understanding me from the inside out. Every emotion I felt it seemed to reflect, but in a way that felt wrong, perverse. It was learning how I moved, how I felt, and perhaps even how I thought. I felt a tear slip down my cheek, a cold sting that the creature seemed to echo in its own mockery, stretching its dark form into a grotesque imitation of human emotion. It watched me, the sick semblance of my own face rippling in that inky mass, and I knew with a sickening certainty that it didn't just see me as prey. It saw me as a specimen. My hand hovered over the panel to close the airlock, my last escape, but I hesitated, fear paralyzing me as I watched it take another step forward, copying me, perfecting me. Every instinct screamed to run, to escape, but I knew that if I shut that door, if I left this creature out here, it would find a way back in. It would hunt, find another, study another, and I'd be complicit in whatever dark game it played. The entity paused as if sensing my indecision, and for a heartbeat, we both remained still, locked in an eerie standoff, face to face. The darkness throbbed again, a sick pulse that drove deeper into my mind, and suddenly I knew what it wanted. It wasn't here to kill me or even to feed. It wanted to understand me, to know me as completely as it knew the darkness of space itself. It was a hunger that went beyond survival. This was curiosity, pure and unrelenting, a terrible need to possess me from the inside out. And in that moment, I felt my mind begin to unravel. a slow descent into something darker and colder than space itself. The airlock could wait. Time had lost all meaning. In the void, minutes bled into hours, or maybe even days. I couldn't tell anymore, couldn't hold on to a single thought as each one slipped from my mind, lost in the relentless, throbbing rhythm that pulsed through my suit, in sync with my own fading heartbeat. I hung in space, suspended between the airlock and the creature, locked in a silent, horrifying standoff. The entity hadn't moved, not really. Instead, it floated just a few feet away, its shape oscillating with a slow, deliberate cadence, as if breathing. Every so often, one of its tendrils would shift, twisting and curling in a way that seemed random, yet horribly calculated. It was watching me, every movement I made, every panicked breath I took, and mimicking each one in a way that was grotesque in its precision. I felt stripped, laid bare in a way that I had never experienced before. This thing was peeling back every layer of me, testing, probing, analyzing. I wanted to turn away, to close my eyes, but I couldn't. I was frozen in place, unable to do anything but stare at it, locked into a perverse game that only it seemed to understand. My mind grasped desperately for anything rational, anything that could explain what this thing was, but every theory fell apart under the weight of my own dread. This was no experiment I could understand. I was the experiment, and it was learning. The thought echoed in my mind, gnawing at me. The creature wasn't just alive, it was curious, and that was worse. So much worse than any hunger or need to kill. Hunger was simple. Curiosity was meticulous, unending. This thing was patient, driven by something so alien and boundless that I could hardly comprehend it. I felt as if I were being dissected from the inside out. My fear, my confusion, each layer of my mind and soul carefully peeled back under its invisible gaze. Without warning, the static on my comms erupted, the hiss and crackle so sudden that I flinched, my breath catching. Then, through the static, a voice broke through. Faint, distorted, but unmistakable. "Alex, are you there?" My heart leapt. It was Lila. Dr. Lila Kim, the station's communications officer, my anchor to anything resembling sanity. I felt a rush of relief so overwhelming that it left me momentarily breathless. I fought to keep my voice steady, but the words tumbled out in a terrified whisper. "Lila, I'm here. I don't know what this is. There's something outside the station. It's..." Her voice crackled, fragmented by the interference, but the urgency in her tone cut through the noise. "Alex, listen. We can see it. Whatever it is, it's alive. It's feeding off something. I don't know how, but it's interacting with you, almost like it's learning." The word hit me like a physical blow. Learning. She'd seen it too, felt it, perhaps from her own place inside the station. I wasn't alone in my fear, but that did little to comfort me. "Lila, I can't get back to the station," I stammered, glancing at the airlock just a few feet behind me, tauntingly close. "It's blocking me. Every time I move, it moves. I think it's using me, trying to understand me." Silence, then a faint hum as Lila seemed to struggle with something on her end. Her voice broke through again, tinged with a fear I'd never heard from her before. "Alex, it's like it's experimenting. We've been watching you, unable to reach you until now. We tried everything. We could see it, but we couldn't help." The comms went silent again, just long enough for the weight of her words to sink in. I wasn't just trapped, I was isolated on purpose, like a lab specimen under glass. Whatever was happening, the crew had been watching helplessly, unable to break through. And that meant this thing, this creature, had kept me trapped, cut off from them, deliberately. The tendrils began to shift again, and I felt the rhythm of the creature's pulse reverberate through the air, beating through my suit, into my bones. My hands started to shake. The thing was responding to my panic, feeding off of it. Each pulse, each calculated movement seemed to sync with my rising fear, as if the creature was drawing something out of me. I had the sickening thought that it wasn't just studying my movements, but my emotions, each nuance of fear and despair, giving it something more, something it could use. "Alex," Lila's voice came again, strained and softer. "You need to keep your mind clear. I know it's impossible, but if you panic, it seems to mimic. We've seen it. Every time you react, it mirrors you. It's like it's using you to understand itself." "Understand itself?" I whispered, bile rising in my throat. What does that mean, Lila?" "We don't know," she replied, voice breaking with a helplessness that made my blood run cold. "But it's adapting. You're giving it something it needs. We don't know what it'll do if it fully comprehends." I felt my heartbeat stutter, my mind splintering as I grappled with the horror of her words. It was adapting, learning not just from me but about itself, using me as a mirror to refine, to perfect. I realized with growing dread that if I kept reacting, it would only grow, shifting into something more dangerous, something more real. The creature moved again, and I could feel it now, in every nerve and every synapse. It knew I was close to breaking, and it was waiting for that final, primal response. I forced myself to stay still, to quiet the frantic rhythm of my breath, to become as silent as the void around me. Maybe if I stilled myself completely, if I gave it nothing, it would lose interest. Maybe it would leave. But even as I tried to control my mind, the creature's pulse grew louder, stronger. Its tendrils curled around me, stretching and retracting in ways that made my skin crawl. It was watching, waiting, yet I could feel something deeper, something almost like frustration, a darkness that was no longer passive but ravenous, a cold calculation morphing into a brutal hunger. A faint hissing filled my ears as my oxygen levels began to drop, and with it came a creeping numbness that made it harder to think, to hold on to anything real. Each ragged breath was slower than the last, and my thoughts grew sluggish, slipping from my grasp like sand through my fingers. The creature seemed to sense it, closing in, drinking in my vulnerability as it crept closer. "Alex," Lila's voice crackled, faint and distant like a dying star. It knows you're weakening. Don't let it in. Don't let it consume." But I was too far gone. My vision blurred, tunneling into black as the last of my oxygen drained away. The edges of the creature stretched, surrounding me, and I felt its presence press against my mind, sifting through memories and emotions with an awful, intimate familiarity. And just as I felt myself slipping under, I understood. This thing wasn't just curious. It was evolving, shaping itself around me, consuming each piece of my mind and soul, feeding off my thoughts until it became something more. Something unstoppable. My last thoughts were of Lila's voice, a desperate warning that echoed in the empty chamber of my mind. Don't let it consume. But it already had. The darkness crept in, closing over me like a shroud. My breath was shallow, each gasp a struggle, my senses dull and fading. Yet, through the numbness, I could feel it, an insistent, invasive rhythm, a slow, pulsing beat that seemed to match my own. The thing had wrapped itself around me, not just physically, but deeper, pushing its way into my mind, hollowing out everything I thought I was. I tried to fight it, tried to remember who I was. Commander Alex Grant, I repeated to myself, desperately holding on to that sliver of identity, that fragile thread of humanity. But with each passing moment, the creature's pulse grew stronger, filling my head, filling my body, until it was all I could hear, all I could feel. I had never understood how silence could have a sound. But this silence, the alien presence that invaded every cell, every thought, was deafening. And somehow I knew it was intentional. The creature wanted me to feel it, to know that my fight was futile. Every heartbeat, every breath, every memory was siphoned away, lost in that terrible rhythm. It wasn't just absorbing me, it was becoming me. Flashes of my past surfaced, distorted and fragmented. Lila's voice, the hum of the station, the faces of my crewmates. Each memory played in reverse, unraveling like film stripped and rewound. But the details were wrong. My memories twisted as if filtered through someone else's mind, each one warped by an alien understanding. The creature was not just absorbing me. It was translating me, breaking me down to understand itself. "Don't let it consume," Lila's voice echoed, a ghostly whisper in the endless dark. I could feel her fear, her last words vibrating against my skin, trapped within me, within us. Because I was no longer alone. I was becoming it. I felt my own thoughts slip away, replaced by something colder, something vast and unfathomable. The tether binding me to the station tugged, a faint reminder of my body, of the life I'd once had. But it was meaningless now. My body was just a shell, just an empty suit adrift in space. The thing inside me had no need for flesh, no need for identity. It was hollow, consuming, vast. The vision of the airlock swam before me, distant and surreal, as though I were looking through someone else's eyes. I felt myself turning, felt the creature's curiosity twist within me, driving my body like a puppet, controlling my every nerve, my every breath. I was no longer Commander Grant. I was the creature's vessel, a mere extension of its will, a canvas on which it painted its terrible design. I could feel its intelligence unfurling, expanding in ways my mind could barely comprehend. It wasn't malicious. There was no hatred, no anger, just an unending hunger to understand, to consume, to become. And in that cold, empty intelligence, I felt my last shreds of humanity dissolve. In those final fleeting moments, I saw everything from a new, detached perspective. The faces of my crewmates, the intricate workings of the station, even the stars themselves, all of it was data, information to be absorbed and processed. There was no beauty, no meaning, only the mechanical necessity of existence. Everything was reduced to a function, a purpose, and I was part of that purpose now, my will extinguished in the face of this ancient cosmic intelligence. And as I drifted closer to the station, I knew the entity's purpose extended beyond me. It had used me, shaped itself through me, and now it was ready to move forward. The station was no longer a home, a place of exploration or refuge. It was a new frontier, another vessel to fill with its dark pulse, its endless, insatiable curiosity. I felt my hand, no, its hand, move to activate the airlock, the darkness within me deepening as the hatch slowly opened. Beyond the door lay the narrow, familiar corridors of the station, filled with warmth, light, and memories that now felt foreign, irrelevant. Soon it would touch everything, everyone. Soon they would all understand what it was to be taken, to be absorbed, to be erased. The thing inside me pulsed with satisfaction, an ancient and terrible contentment. It knew the station's secrets now, knew the frailties and fears of the humans within, and it would savor each one, relishing the slow, methodical stripping of their minds, just as it had with mine. A faint spark of something tried to push through, a memory, a scream, a final plea, but it was snuffed out by the darkness, a brief flicker extinguished by an endless void. I stepped through the airlock, my movements fluid yet alien, a grotesque imitation of life. My eyes scanned the empty hallway, noting every detail with a detached curiosity that was no longer my own. Each footfall was hollow, an echo of something that had once been human, now just a shell filled with something older, something boundless. In the reflection of a porthole, I caught a glimpse of myself, of what I had become. My face stared back at me, unchanged yet somehow unrecognizable. The eyes dull, empty. I felt no fear, no sadness, just a profound, unsettling calm. I was one with it now, a part of its endless, all-consuming intelligence. The entity would spread, quietly, patiently, adapting to every thought, every movement, every fear it encountered, and soon it would be ready to take more, to drift farther, to become whatever it needed to be. As I moved down the corridor, the rhythmic pulse within me grew stronger, a steady beat that echoed through the silence. And somewhere in the distant corners of my mind, I knew that it would never end. The creature was eternal, and now so was I, an unending part of something vast, something hungry, something complete. And in that final, hopeless realization, I understood that there was no escape. There never had been. The quiet pulse thrummed through me, through the station, through the dark expanse of space beyond, a haunting rhythm that would go on forever. The quiet call of the void, reaching out to everything it touched, ready to consume again.